The night a billionaire opened his penthouse door to a black nanny he had never met. His silent little boy ran into her arms like he'd known her forever. And 3 nights later, on Christmas Eve, that same boy whispered his first word in months, but it wasn't Daddy. Outside, Manhattan looked like a snow globe someone had gently shaken for the holidays. Fifth Avenue glittered with white lights. Choir music drifted up from the street below. Every window across the skyline seemed to glow with warmth, laughter, and the kind of Christmas joy money was supposed to buy. But inside Ethan Calloway's glass-walled penthouse, there was only silence. At 43, Ethan was the kind of white millionaire magazines loved to photograph and strangers loved to envy. He had the sharp jaw, the tailored coats, the private drivers, the billion-dollar tech empire, and the cold, unreadable eyes of a man who had learned to survive by feeling as little as possible. Ever since his wife, Claire, died 10 months ago, he had poured every ounce of grief into work because work was easier than facing what remained of his family. And what remained was his 7-year-old son, Noah. Noah had not truly spoken since the night his mother died. Doctors called it trauma. Specialists called it selective mutism. Ethan called it the one problem money could not solve. So when a black woman named Naomi stood in his doorway that snowy December evening, quiet, composed, wrapped in a simple wool coat, holding nothing but a small leather bag, and a strange calm he couldn't explain, Ethan almost sent her away. Then Noah appeared at the end of the hallway and stared at her like he had been waiting for her all along. And when Naomi knelt down, Noah took one trembling step forward, then another. And later that night, with Christmas lights flickering softly in the dark, Noah leaned close to her and whispered something that made Ethan's blood run cold. Ethan had once believed he understood loss. He thought loss was signing hospital forms with a hand that no longer felt attached to his body. He thought it was standing beside Claire's casket in a black wool coat, while snow fell over the cemetery in thin, silent sheets. He thought it was returning to a penthouse still filled with her perfume, her books, her half-finished Christmas shopping lists, and somehow surviving the sight of her winter scarf still hanging by the door. But real loss, he would come to understand, was not the day his wife died. It was everything that disappeared after. Claire had been the warmth in every room Ethan entered without noticing. She had been the one who remembered to kneel beside Noah's bed when he had bad dreams, the one who knew which spoon he liked with his cereal and why he hated the sound of the blender in the mornings, the one who could soften Ethan's sharp edges with a single glance across the dinner table. And when she was gone, Ethan discovered something terrifying. He did not know how to be the heart of a home. At first, he tried to solve grief the only way he knew how, efficiently, expensively, and from a distance. He hired the best child psychologists in New York, speech therapists, behavioral specialists, private pediatric consultants flown in from Boston and Chicago. The nursery was replaced with a brighter, calmer room. The walls were repainted. The schedule was optimized. The care was managed. None of it reached Noah. The 7-year-old boy who had once filled the penthouse with toy trains, dinosaur roars, and endless questions had become quiet in a way no child ever should. He still walked, still ate when reminded, still stared out the window for long stretches as if waiting for something only he could see. But he barely spoke. Sometimes days passed without a single word, and the worst part was that he no longer reached for Ethan. Every attempt Ethan made felt rehearsed, delayed, wrong. He would stand in Noah's doorway at night, meaning to say something tender, only to hear himself ask practical things instead. Did you eat? Did you finish with your tutor? Are you tired? He sounded like a man managing a crisis, not a father mourning beside his son. The guilt of that settled inside him like ice. And yet Ethan was not the only one carrying a wound into that Christmas season. Across the city, Naomi Brooks had spent most of her life learning what happened when people promised to stay and didn't. She had entered foster care at 8 years old with a plastic grocery bag, 2 mismatched socks, and a memory of her mother's voice that faded a little more each year. Some homes had been kind. Others had simply been temporary. By 19, she had already learned the difference between being sheltered and being loved. She had once dreamed of becoming an elementary school teacher, She loved children with the kind of instinct no classroom could teach, an ability to sense fear behind silence, loneliness behind anger, hope behind withdrawal. But dreams cost money, and life had demanded more immediate things from her. Her younger aunt became sick. Bills piled up. School slipped away one semester at a time. By 34, Naomi had become the person people called when someone fragile needed patience. She worked part-time with children, volunteered at a holiday family shelter in Brooklyn, and every December she organized toy drives because she knew exactly what Christmas looked like when no one came for you. She had seen children stop speaking before. She had seen grief take root in small bodies and make them disappear while still standing in front of you. Which was why, when a woman at the shelter quietly mentioned a wealthy widower looking for someone gentle but discreet to help with his son over the holidays, Naomi should have said no. Everything about it sounded wrong for her life. Wrong for her pride. Wrong for her heart. And yet something in her hesitated. Maybe it was the timing. Maybe it was the little handprint ornament she had helped another child paint that morning. Maybe it was the sentence she had whispered to herself every Christmas for years. No child should feel abandoned in December. So she took the train uptown in the falling snow, stepped into a building where the marble floors gleamed like a museum, and prepared herself to meet another rich family who thought money could soften pain. What she did not expect was the boy. The moment Noah appeared in that long penthouse hallway, Naomi felt it something quiet and broken and achingly familiar in his eyes. He did not look at her the way children looked at strangers. He looked at her the way lonely children looked at possibility. And behind him, standing stiffly in the half-light of the Christmas tree, Ethan Calloway watched them both with the expression of a man too tired to believe in hope anymore. He didn't know it yet, but every life in that apartment was about to change. Naomi did not try to win Noah over. That, more than anything, was what unsettled Ethan. Every specialist he had hired in the past 10 months had arrived with a method, a strategy, a sequence of carefully calibrated techniques meant to encourage verbal re-engagement or rebuild attachment behaviors. They carried clipboards, spoke softly in expensive terminology, and always seemed to look at Noah as if he were a problem to solve. Naomi did none of that. On her first full morning in the penthouse, Ethan came downstairs expecting awkward small talk and forced progress. Instead, he found Noah sitting cross-legged on the thick cream rug by the Christmas tree, while Naomi sat a few feet away on the floor, quietly stringing dried orange slices and cinnamon sticks onto ribbon. Neither of them was speaking, and somehow, the room felt more alive than it had in months. Noah did not look anxious. He did not look cornered. He simply watched Naomi's hands move, slow and steady, as the early winter sunlight spilled across the glass walls and reflected off the ornaments Claire had once chosen. Ethan stood there longer than he meant to. Naomi looked up first. "Good morning," she said gently, as if she had always belonged in spaces where silence needed to be handled carefully. He nodded. "He usually doesn't sit with people this long." She glanced at Noah, then back at Ethan. "That's because most people walk into grief like they're trying to fix a leak." Ethan frowned faintly. Naomi gave a small shrug. "Kids know when you're trying to force them back into the world before they're ready." It was not disrespectful. If anything, it was worse than that. It was true. By the third day, small things had begun to change. Noah still did not speak, but he started following Naomi from room to room with a quiet, cautious loyalty that looked almost fragile. If she folded laundry in the sitting room, he sat nearby with his crayons. If she stirred hot cocoa in the kitchen, he stood on a step stool and watched the marshmallows melt. If she hummed softly while straightening the bookshelves, he lingered just close enough to hear. She never asked him for words. She only gave him warmth. That afternoon, she found an old gingerbread house kit in the pantry, one Claire had probably bought the previous year and never opened. She spread the icing tubes and candy pieces across the marble island and invited Noah with nothing more than a smile and a raised eyebrow. He hesitated. Then, slowly, he climbed onto the stool beside her. From his home office down the hall, Ethan could hear the faint scrape of candy bowls, the rustle of wax paper, and once so softly he almost thought he imagined it a tiny breath of laughter. He froze over his keyboard. He had not heard that sound in nearly a year. Later that evening, when he came into the kitchen, he found the gingerbread house leaning slightly to one side, overloaded with gumdrops and peppermint, its roof uneven and imperfect in the way only a child could make something beautiful. Noah was sitting at the table with his drawing pad. Naomi was beside him, wrapping presents for the holiday toy drive she still planned to drop off on Christmas morning. Ethan noticed the paper first, then the drawing. Noah had sketched the three of them beneath the Christmas tree. A tall man, a small boy, and a woman with dark curls and gentle eyes standing in the center, her hand reaching toward both of them. Ethan's throat tightened unexpectedly. "He hasn't drawn people in months," he said quietly. Naomi looked at the page, then at Noah. Maybe he's remembering what it feels like to see them. That night, after dinner, Naomi sat with Noah in the den beside the fireplace and read aloud from a worn copy of the Polar Express she had found tucked behind a row of art books. Her voice was low and warm, carrying softly through the apartment while snow drifted outside the glass in slow white spirals. Ethan stayed in the doorway without meaning to. He told himself he was only checking in, but the truth was, he could not stop watching. Noah was curled under a knit blanket with his head resting lightly against Naomi's side, his small fingers clutching the edge of the book every time she turned the page. His body, once so rigid and withdrawn, looked looser now, safer, like a child beginning, inch by inch, to come back. For the first time since Claire's death, Ethan felt something he had almost forgotten how to hold. Not relief. Something more dangerous than that. Hope. And hope, he had learned, was far more frightening than despair. Despair asked nothing of you. Hope demanded that you believe in things before you had proof. So when Naomi rose later to carry Noah to bed, and the boy instinctively reached for her hand before disappearing down the hallway, Ethan heard himself ask the question he had been trying not to think. "How are you doing this?" Naomi paused. Then she turned back, her expression unreadable in the soft glow of the Christmas lights. "I'm not doing anything," she said quietly. "I'm just staying long enough for him to believe I won't leave." Ethan stood very still after that, because in the silence that followed, Noah looked up from her side, his eyes wide and fixed on Ethan with a strange intensity. And then, with trembling little fingers, he held up his newest drawing. This time, there was a fourth figure in it, a woman with long hair standing near the Christmas tree, and above her, in shaky childlike letters, Noah had written one word. The drawing should have felt like a breakthrough. Instead, it felt like a warning. Ethan stared at the page in Noah's trembling hands long after the boy had gone to bed that night. The stick figure shapes were simple, almost painfully so, but the meaning behind them was not. Noah had drawn his mother for the first time since the funeral. Not in a memory book, not in therapy, not in one of the dozens of carefully guided exercises the specialists had suggested. He had drawn her now, after Naomi arrived. And somehow, that did not calm Ethan. It unsettled him, because grief, he had learned, did not always open doors. Sometimes it opened wounds. The next morning, he found himself watching Naomi differently. Not with gratitude this time, but with the wary attention of a man who had spent too many years protecting assets, reading motives, and spotting hidden intentions before they cost him something he couldn't get back. She was in the kitchen with Noah, helping him cut star shapes from sugar cookie dough while Christmas music played softly from a speaker on the counter. Flour dusted the sleeves of her sweater. Noah stood close beside her, quieter than most children but no longer hollow. When he accidentally broke one of the stars, Naomi didn't rush to fix it. She simply smiled and said, "Then that one gets to be special." Noah almost smiled back. Ethan should have felt relief. Instead, something sharper twisted in his chest, because for the first time in nearly a year, his son was becoming reachable, and Ethan was not the one reaching him. That same afternoon, the outside world found its way in. It started with a photograph. Ethan had taken Noah downstairs to the building's private courtyard so he could get some air while Naomi stayed behind to finish wrapping gifts for the shelter toy drive. Snow was falling in soft silver sheets, and for once, Noah had not resisted putting on his coat. It had almost felt normal. Fragile, but normal. Then by evening, his assistant. Claire named cruelly enough for Ethan to still flinch every time he heard it appeared at his office door with an expression he recognized immediately. "There's something online," she said carefully. His jaw tightened before she even turned the tablet toward him. The headline came from one of those polished gossip business sites that fed off wealth, scandal, and the illusion of insider access. Billionaire widower spends Christmas with mysterious new woman in his penthouse. Below, it was a grainy, zoomed-in image of Naomi from the night she arrived, stepping out of a car in front of the building, bundled in her dark coat, her face calm and unreadable beneath the city lights. Another article followed within the hour. Who is Ethan Calloway's holiday companion? Sources say she's living with him and his son. By dinner time, social media had done what it always did, turned a private life into a public story people felt entitled to rewrite. Comments spread fast and cruel. Gold digger. Convenient timing. From nanny to next wife in record time. Poor dead wife. This is disrespectful. Ethan shut the tablet off so hard the screen flashed black. For several minutes, he simply sat there, his pulse beating hard behind his ribs. He wanted to say it didn't matter. That he was above this. That he had spent years learning how to ignore noise. But this was not just noise. This was Noah. This was his son's fragile recovery. His home. Claire's memory. Everything raw and private being dragged under fluorescent public judgment by strangers who knew nothing and said everything. And the worst part, the part Ethan hated himself for, was that some dark, suspicious corner of his mind had already begun whispering before the articles ever appeared. How did she get this close so fast? Why did Noah trust her so easily? Why did it feel like she had stepped into an empty place in their lives and known exactly how to fill it? That night, the pressure worsened. His mother called first, her voice clipped with the polished concern of a woman who had always believed appearances were a moral responsibility. "Ethan, tell me this is not becoming one of those situations," she said without preamble. He closed his eyes. "Mother, you have a grieving child, a dead wife, a public company. This is not the time to let some woman with unclear intentions make herself indispensable." Some woman, he nearly hung up on her, but the words stayed. Later, while he was still simmering from that call, his former girlfriend, Vanessa Hart, socialite, fundraiser, an expert in timing, appeared uninvited at the penthouse, with a bottle of wine and the kind of sympathetic smile that always seemed to sharpen when she sensed weakness. "I came because I was worried," she said, stepping inside before he could refuse. Naomi happened to be in the hallway at that moment, carrying folded laundry. Vanessa's eyes moved over her once, cool and quick, before landing back on Ethan. "Oh," she said, as though pleasantly surprised by something she had absolutely come to see for herself. "So, the blogs were true." Naomi paused, but did not flinch. "I'm just helping with Noah," she said calmly. Vanessa smiled the way some people smile when they want to sound gracious while doing the opposite. "Of course you are." The silence that followed was thick enough to bruise. Ethan saw Noah at the edge of the hallway, then small, still, watching everything. Watching Naomi be judged. Watching Ethan say nothing. And instead of protecting the one stable thing his son had found in months, Ethan did the one thing fear always pushed him toward. He chose control. "Naomi," he said, his voice colder than he intended. "Can I speak to you in private?" She nodded once and followed him into the study. The moment the door shut, the air between them changed. He did not yell. That would have been kinder. Instead, he spoke with the quiet restraint of a man trying to sound reasonable while saying something unforgivable. "I need to know exactly what your intentions are here." Naomi blinked once. "My intentions? The press doesn't invent stories out of nowhere. My family is talking. Investors are talking. People are noticing how close you've gotten to Noah." For a moment, she simply looked at him, and what hurt most was not anger in her face. It was disappointment. "You think I wanted this?" she asked softly. "I think," Ethan said, too far inside his fear to stop now, "that maybe I was too quick to trust someone I barely know." The room went still. Naomi set the folded towel in her arms down on the desk with careful, steady hands. Then she lifted her chin. "I never asked you to trust me," she said. "I only showed up for your son." Ethan said nothing. Her eyes shone, but she did not let them break. The difference between us, Mr. Calloway, she said quietly, is that when he was hurting, I saw a child. You saw a situation to manage. He looked away first, and Naomi, with more dignity than anyone in that apartment deserved from her, picked up her coat. By the time Ethan realized Noah had been standing just outside the study door long enough to hear everything, it was already too late. Because as Naomi walked toward the elevator, Noah let out a sound no one in that house had heard since Claire died. A broken, desperate cry, and then he ran after her. Naomi had almost reached the elevator when she heard him. It was not a word, not yet. It was the sound of something far more fragile than language, a child's grief ripping open in real time. She turned just as Noah stumbled across the marble floor in his socks, tears streaming down his face, one hand stretched toward her with desperate, shaking urgency. For a second, Ethan could not move. He had seen his son cry before, in the early weeks after Claire's death. But never like this. Never with this kind of raw, panicked need. Noah looked less like a quiet little boy, and more like someone being abandoned all over again. Naomi, Ethan started, but the name felt useless in his mouth now. Naomi dropped to her knees before Noah reached her. He collided with her so hard he nearly knocked them both sideways, burying his face against her shoulder. His whole body trembled. Naomi held him instinctively, one hand at the back of his head, the other rubbing slow circles between his shoulders, as if trying to steady something much deeper than breath. "It's okay," she whispered. "I've got you. I've got you." At the study door, Vanessa stood frozen, suddenly stripped of every polished phrase she might have used to defend herself. Even Ethan's mother, still on speakerphone on the forgotten console table, had gone silent. Ethan took one step forward. Noah flinched. That hurt more than any accusation ever could. Naomi looked up then, not with anger, but with clarity. "He thinks I'm leaving because of him," she said softly. The words landed with brutal force. Because of course he did. Children nearly always turned loss inward. Ethan knew that. Every doctor had told him so, and still, somehow, in the span of one frightened evening, he had recreated the exact terror Noah had been living inside since Claire died. The terror that if he loved someone, they would disappear. "Send her home," Vanessa said quietly from the hallway, as if trying to restore order by sounding practical. "This is already too messy." Naomi rose slowly, still holding Noah close. She did not even look at Vanessa, but Ethan did, and for the first time that night, he saw the whole scene from outside himself. His son shattered, a good woman publicly humiliated in his own home, and him wealthy, powerful, admired standing at the center of it, having failed at the one thing that mattered. "Leave," he said. Vanessa blinked. "Ethan." I wasn't talking to Naomi. The apartment went still. Vanessa's face hardened, pride rushing in where sympathy had failed. She set the unopened bottle of wine on the entry table and walked out without another word. Ethan's mother began speaking again through the phone. Something clipped and offended, but he picked it up and ended the call. Then he turned back to Noah. His son was still clinging to Naomi with both arms. And then, in a voice cracked by sobbing and long silence, Noah finally spoke. "Don't make her go." The room seemed to stop breathing. Naomi's hand froze against his back. Ethan stared as if the child in front of him had performed something impossible. For 10 months, specialists had coaxed and waited and strategized. For 10 months, Ethan had listened to silence at breakfast, silence in the car, silence at bedtime. And now, with tears wet on his cheeks and terror in his eyes, Noah had broken through it not in a doctor's office or during some carefully guided exercise, but to save the woman who had stayed. Naomi slowly knelt again so she could look him in the face. "Noah," she said gently. "Look at me." He did. "I'm here." Noah swallowed hard. "Promise?" Something inside Ethan cracked at the sound of that word. Promise. Claire had once told him that promises to children should be made sparingly, because they built their whole little worlds on them. And Ethan, in his grief and fear, and endless attempts to manage what could not be managed, had forgotten that healing was not built on perfection, it was built on safety. Naomi answered without hesitation. I promise I won't disappear tonight. Noah nodded once, as if that alone was enough to hold him together for another minute. Later, after Naomi helped him settle in bed, after the tremors in his small body eased and his breathing slowed beneath the glow of the nightlight, Ethan stood alone in the den, staring at the ruined symmetry of the Christmas tree. One of Noah's handmade ornaments had fallen crookedly to one side during the chaos, a felt reindeer. Claire had helped him make it the year before. He reached to straighten it. Instead, his fingers brushed against something tucked deep between the branches, a folded strip of red construction paper looped with gold thread. He frowned and gently pulled it free. It was one of Noah's drawings. On the front, in uneven block letters, was written, "For Mom." Ethan's throat tightened. He opened it carefully. Inside was a child's picture of the penthouse living room, the Christmas tree, the fireplace, a small boy, a tall man, a woman with dark skin and kind eyes, and beside her, another woman, Claire, recognizable even in stick figure form because of the long yellow hair Noah always used for her. The two women were standing next to each other. Above them, Noah had drawn a crooked star. On the back was a line written in shaky pencil, half letters and half guesswork. Mom said she would. Send Simone. Ethan sat down hard on the couch. For several seconds he could only stare. He remembered suddenly, so suddenly it stole the air from his lungs, the last December charity gala. Claire had insisted on attending before she got sick. The family shelter in Brooklyn. The toy drive. Claire kneeling in a red coat to speak with volunteers after everyone else had moved on to cameras and speeches. She had come home that night quieter than usual. Later, in bed, she had told him about a young black woman there, who had stayed after the event to clean up broken boxes and calm a frightened child no one else could reach. She has the gentlest hands, Claire had said drowsily. Children know who's safe before adults do. At the time, Ethan had barely listened. He had an acquisition closing that week. Emails, calls, numbers that seemed urgent then and obscene now. He rose abruptly and went to the kitchen where Naomi was rinsing out Noah's cocoa mug. Did you know Claire? He asked. Naomi's hands stopped under the running water. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she turned off the faucet. Not the way you mean, she said quietly. We met twice. At the shelter. The second time, she came alone. Ethan felt his pulse in his throat. She stayed after the event, Naomi continued. Most donors leave when the cameras do. Your wife didn't. She helped serve dinner. Sat with the kids. She asked me about my life like she actually wanted the answer. Ethan could almost hear Claire doing exactly that. Naomi lowered her eyes briefly, remembering. She told me Noah was shy, that Christmas was his favorite, that she worried he felt things too deeply. Her voice softened. A few months later, I heard she had died. I never imagined I'd see her son. Why didn't you say anything? Naomi looked at him steadily. Because grief isn't a key you use to unlock trust, and because I wasn't there for her memory. I was there for him. Shame washed through Ethan with a force that made him lightheaded. He had doubted her. Measured her. Let strangers reduce her. And all the while she had protected the dignity of the dead woman he loved better than he had protected the living one standing in front of him. From the hallway came the soft patter of feet. Both of them turned. Noah stood there in his pajamas, clutching the edge of the wall. His eyes were glassy with sleep, but open in a way Ethan had not seen in months. He looked at Naomi first, then at his father. Then, small and hoarse and absolute, he said, Mom told me. Ethan's breath caught. Noah took another step. In my dream. He whispered. She said, Don't be scared. She'll find you before Christmas. The tears Ethan had held back for nearly a year rose so fast he could not stop them. He dropped to his knees in front of his son, no longer caring how undignified grief made him look. I'm sorry, he choked out. I'm so sorry, buddy. Noah looked at him uncertainly. Ethan opened his arms slowly, as if asking permission. After one terrible second, Noah stepped into them. Ethan held him with shaking hands, pressing his face into the soft hair at the top of his son's head. Over Noah's shoulder, he met Naomi's eyes. There was no accusation in them now, only exhaustion, kindness, and a sadness that made forgiveness feel like something sacred. Ethan rose, still holding Noah with one arm. "I need to fix this," he said. Outside, church bells began ringing across the city. Christmas Eve had arrived, and Ethan Calloway, billionaire, widower, master of damage control, finally understood that there were some things money could never repair unless he first learned how to kneel before the truth. He reached for his coat, because there was only one thing left to do now. He had to ask Naomi Brooks to come back, not as an employee he had doubted, but as the woman his son had trusted, his wife had remembered, and his broken home had somehow been waiting for, all along. On Christmas morning, the penthouse no longer felt like a museum of grief. It felt lived in. Naomi stood by the tree, in the soft gold light of dawn, holding a mug of cocoa while Noah sat cross-legged on the rug, laughing quietly as he tore into wrapping paper with more excitement than Ethan had seen in nearly a year. When Noah looked up and reached for Naomi without thinking, Ethan no longer felt fear, only gratitude. He crossed the room, knelt beside his son, and for the first time in months, Noah leaned into him willingly, small, warm, real. Then Noah looked between them and smiled. "Home," he whispered. Just one word, but it was enough to bring tears to Ethan's eyes. Outside, church bells rang across Manhattan while snow drifted past the glass walls in slow white silence. Inside, the Christmas lights glowed softly around the tree Claire had once decorated. And somehow, instead of feeling haunted by her absence, Ethan felt guided by her love. Not everything broken had been erased, but something sacred had begun, and for the first time since Claire was gone, the house felt like home again.